My name is Elise Harrington. I'm 38 years old, and last Tuesday I buried my father. Cancer took him fast 3 months from diagnosis to silence. There wasn't time to prepare, not really. Just the blur of hospital corridors, hospice nurses, and watching the strongest man I knew fade into someone I barely recognized. I stood at the pulpit this morning, hands shaking as I read the eulogy I'd written at 3 a.m. My voice cracked twice once when I mentioned how he used to fix my broken toys with duct tape and laughter, and again when I said he was the kind of man who apologized when he was wrong even to a 10-year-old. When I sat back down, my husband Mark reached for my hand. His grip was light, too light. I told myself it was nerves, that he was just uncomfortable with grief. But when I looked at him, he wasn't looking at the casket. He was staring straight ahead like someone waiting for a train that's already late. After the service, people moved in. Waves, hugs, flowers, quiet condolences. My mother was sobbing into my aunt's shoulder. I tried to keep it together for her shaking hand, saying thank you 100 times. Then Mark touched my elbow. Can we talk? His voice was so casual that for a second I thought he was asking if I wanted coffee, but he was already leading me toward the back of the church where the air smelled like rain and dust. What is it? I asked. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. I think this is good timing. For a moment, I didn't understand. Good timing. For what? He handed me the envelope. I opened it, my eyes blurred. At the words, petition for dissolution of marriage. I looked up, breath caught in my throat. You're divorcing me. Mark nodded, exhaling like he'd been holding it in for months. It's practical, Elise. You'll be busy with estate stuff, and I'll handle the paperwork. We can do this cleanly, efficiently. I stared at him, my father's casket not 20 feet away. You think this is efficient? He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward the church doors. We've both known it's been over for a while. There's no perfect moment. This just makes sense. A sound left me half laugh, half disbelief. You're ending our marriage at my father's funeral. It's just timing, he said quickly, as if the word could make it better. I already have an attorney. You'll be served officially next week, but I wanted to tell you face to face. Professional courtesy. Professional, I stopped myself before the word shattered. All I could do was stare at him, the man who once promised he'd hold me through anything. Something inside me, the part that had been raw and grieving, went cold. Not numb, just clear. I folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and handed it to him. You're right, I said softly. Timing is everything. He looked almost relieved. I'm glad you're being mature about this. I nodded, but my voice came from somewhere deeper than grief. Don't mistake calm for surrender, Mark. He blinked, confused. What? Nothing, I said. Go, I'll be fine. He turned and walked toward the church doors, adjusting his tie like he'd just finished a meeting. People glanced at us, whispers flickering like candlelight. I stood there for a long moment, hearing the faint sound of my mother crying. The murmur of condolences still flowing through the church. My heart felt hollow, yet somehow anchored, like it had found a new kind of gravity. Behind me, someone stepped forward, a man in a charcoal suit, quiet but purposeful. Elise, he said softly, are you sure you want to do this today? I turned to him, my attorney Daniel Rowe. He'd been sitting in the back pew, just like we'd arranged 2 days ago. I met his gaze and nodded. He chose the timing. I'm just responding to it. Daniel glanced toward the casket. You don't have to. I do, I interrupted gently. My father used to say, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Mark showed me today. Daniel's eyes softened. Then we moved forward. I inhaled slowly, the scent of lilies and wax heavy in the air. My father would have hated this kind of chaos, but he'd also have told me not to let anyone take advantage of my silence. As we walked towards the exit, I caught my reflection in the church's glass doors. Pale face, trembling hands. Eyes too bright. I didn't see a woman being abandoned. I saw a woman who had just been freed, even if it didn't feel like it yet. Outside, rain had started thin and steady. I stood on the steps and whispered to the gray sky. You were right, Dad. Timing really is everything. Then I tucked my hair behind my ear, squared my shoulders, and nodded to Daniel. Let's begin. The drizzle turned heavier as I stood on the church steps, the edges of my father's eulogy curling in my hands. Inside, guests were still murmuring condolences, unaware that the burial had just turned into a declaration of war. Daniel. My attorney opened his umbrella and gestured toward the parking lot. Do you want to wait until after the burial? I shook my head. No, he made his move. We respond now. The rain blurred everything. Tombstones, umbrellas, the blurred faces of people pretending not to stare. Mark was standing under the portico speaking to someone on the phone, his back to me. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed, as if this was all going according to plan. Daniel whispered, "Are you ready?" I exhaled slowly, more than he'll ever expect. We walked toward him. Mark turned when he heard my heels click on the wet marble. He hung up the phone, looking mildly annoyed. "Elise, I thought we said we'd handle this privately." "We are," I said quietly, "privately enough." Daniel stepped forward and handed him a document folder. Mark frowned, his lips tightening. "What's this?" "An acknowledgement of receipt," Daniel said evenly. "Our formal counterfiling will be submitted by tomorrow morning." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Counterfiling for what I just for divorce," Daniel finished. "On grounds of adultery." The color drained from Mark's face. His voice came out tight. "That's ridiculous." I tilted my head slightly, watching him flounder. "Is it?" Daniel reached into the folder again and produced several printed photographs sealed in a transparent sleeve. Hotel lobbies, parking garages. Mark's car parked outside a downtown hotel 14 times. Mark's breath hitched. "Where did you—" "From the private investigator," Daniel interrupted. "Legally obtained surveillance, public locations, phone records, the works." Mark's jaw tensed. "This is insane. You had me followed." I folded my arms. I hired someone to confirm what I already knew. He looked around nervously, realizing a few guests were glancing our way. "You're really doing this here. You handed me divorce papers at my father's funeral," I said evenly. "This is me respecting your sense of timing." Daniel laid one final document atop the stack. "You might also recall this." Mark's eyes flicked down the prenup, specifically the page with the infidelity clause. He stared at the underlined sentence as though it were a foreign language. "A violation of fidelity shall result in a penalty of $200,000 to the aggrieved spouse." Mark blinked fast. "That clause, that was just your idea," I said quietly. "You said it would keep us both honest. Remember?" His mouth opened closed. The rain made small rivers down his forehead, darkening his suit. "Elise, it's a mistake. We can talk later." "No, Mark, we'll talk through counsel, like professionals." Daniel added, "You'll be receiving the countersuit notice and financial disclosure request within 48 hours. Given the evidence, my client will seek enforcement of the prenup in full and full ownership of the marital residence." Mark's voice rose strained. "This is humiliating. At a funeral." I stared at him unblinking. "You're the one who chose the stage." From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother watching from the church doors, pale and trembling. She looked between us, confusion and hurt etched deep into her face. Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "You've lost it. You're letting grief make you vindictive." My tone stayed calm. No grief made me quiet. Your betrayal made me precise. Daniel stepped closer to Mark, his voice low but firm. "All communication goes through me from this point forward. My client won't be engaging directly." Mark's nostrils flared. "You can't just—" Daniel handed him a business card. "You'll find that we can." A murmur spread through the few remaining mourners nearby. Mark caught sight of their faces, shame and anger twisting together. He stuffed the documents under his arm and turned toward me. "You're really proud of this, aren't you? Making a scene in front of your father's casket." I met his eyes. "You made a mockery of this day, not me. I'm just ending it with truth." For a long electric second, the only sound was rain hitting the stone steps. Then Mark turned, muttered something under his breath, and stormed off toward the parking lot. He didn't look back. I stood there, drenched, the manila envelope still heavy in my hand. The ache in my chest wasn't heartbreak, not anymore. It was the slow, burning realization that this was the first time in years I wasn't pretending to be small. My mother rushed toward me, gripping my arm. "Elise, what on earth is happening?" I turned to her gently. "The truth, Mom. Just the truth." She looked toward the retreating figure of my husband, now barely visible through the rain. "Did you know?" "Yes," I said quietly. "For weeks. I didn't want to believe it, until I saw the messages." Her face fell. "Oh, honey." I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes. Dad used to say that when someone shows you who they really are, you shouldn't wait for them to prove it twice. Her hand tightened around mine. "He'd be proud of you, you know, for standing up for yourself." Maybe I whispered, but he'd probably wish I hadn't had to. The rain eased. People were beginning to leave umbrellas, folding, whispers fading. I looked back one last time at the closed casket, at the flowers wilting slightly in the damp air. "Rest easy, Dad," I murmured. "I'm done letting anyone use my silence as a shield." Daniel came beside me, placing a discreet hand on my shoulder. We'll file everything in the morning. You don't need to see him again. I nodded. Good. Then I took one final look at the church, the place where I'd said goodbye to my father, and apparently to the man who once promised to love me forever. 2 losses in one day, but only one deserved to be mourned. It's been a week since the funeral, but it feels like a lifetime. The house is too quiet, a silence that hums like grief's aftershock. Every morning I wake to the same ritual, make coffee. I never finish, stare at the phone. I refuse to answer. Mark's been calling nonstop, 15 missed calls the first day, 8 the next. Then the messages started, first pleading, then angry, then strangely sentimental. Elise, please. We don't have to go to war over this. You're overreacting. We both made mistakes. You're destroying what little respect we still had left. Each one sits in my inbox like a bruise, but I don't reply. Everything goes through Daniel now. He told me the PI's full report arrived 184 pages of mistakes. Photos, texts, hotel receipts, credit card statements, 8 months of deceit, 14 hotel stays, weekend work trips that weren't work at all. I didn't look through the whole thing. Just the first few pages were enough screenshots of messages between Mark and Natalie. One text made me sit down on the kitchen floor because my knees gave out. I'll do it after the funeral. She'll be too emotional to fight back. Easiest timing. Easiest timing. The phrase keeps echoing in my head like static. I found myself in my father's old study that night, the one with the heavy oak desk and the smell of cedar and varnish that never quite fades. I was looking for a distraction, maybe a stack of his old photographs, something that would pull me out of this spiral when I found it. A letter, folded neatly inside the drawer, addressed to me in his tidy handwriting. It was dated 2 months before his diagnosis. Elise. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say everything I wanted. You've always been kind, sometimes too kind. Don't let that kindness convince you that silence is noble. Silence only protects the wrong people. And if someone ever tries to take advantage of your heart, remember you're your father's daughter. You were never built to break quietly. I didn't cry when I read it. I just sat there staring at the words until they blurred. My father had always seen things before I did, including this, it seems. By the next morning, I knew what I had to do. I printed every text message, every email, every receipt. I documented each call Mark made and every voicemail he left. Daniel told me to build the pattern. So that's what I did, a timeline of betrayal from the first lie to the final signature on the divorce papers he tried to hand me beside my father's coffin. That night, Mark called again. I let it ring until the voicemail beeped. Then I listened. Elise, please, I don't even love her. It was just a mistake. We can fix this. Counseling, whatever it takes. You're overreacting. Overreacting. He used that word a lot, even when I caught him lying about money, even when I asked why his phone was always face down on the table. I deleted the voicemail, then forwarded the transcript to Daniel for record. He replied within minutes, "Good. Keep logging everything. He's unraveling." Still, the public side of things was starting to sting. Mutual acquaintances had begun whispering Elise is not doing well since her dad passed. She's become vindictive, suing Mark over nothing. I even got a text from one of his colleagues. I heard you're making up stories because you're jealous of him moving on. Moving on, so that's what they called cheating now. I sat in my car that night, parked in front of the house, staring at the porch light flickering against the rain. For a moment, I almost called him to scream to demand why, but I didn't, because I could almost hear my father's voice. Don't waste your breath explaining yourself to liars. The next morning, Daniel called. The opposing counsel reached out, he said. They want to negotiate. They'll drop their filing if you drop the infidelity clause. I laughed a sound so sharp it startled even me. They think I'm bluffing, I said. He didn't answer, but I could hear his smile over the phone. They're about to find out you're not. That afternoon, my mother came by. She looked older than she did a week ago. Grief wears people differently. She glanced around the half-packed house, the boxes of Dad's tools, the half-empty photo frames. Elise, she said gently, you don't have to be strong all the time. I poured her tea. I'm not being strong. I'm just done pretending to be weak. She reached across the table and took my hand. You sound just like him, you know. I'm trying, I said. Later that evening, I walked into my father's workshop, the place he spent his weekends building furniture and fixing the unfixable. His flannel jacket still hung on the hook. On the workbench beneath a layer of dust was a small wooden box he'd been carving before he got sick. I opened it and found another folded note inside, only 3 words this time. Finish what's started. I smiled, tears finally slipping free. Okay, Dad, I whispered. I will. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I opened my laptop and began writing a statement for the court. Not the kind filled with anger, but something measured, deliberate, and exact. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to chase him. I was going to finish what he started. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that comes just before dawn. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid of what was coming next. Because the truth wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my weapon. 3 weeks. That's how long it's been since the funeral, since Mark's mask cracked, since I stopped playing the quiet, reasonable wife. But I've learned something about people like him. When they can't control you anymore, they try to control your story. It started small. A few coworkers of mine from the design firm texted, "Hey, is everything okay? We heard about you and Mark." Then someone forwarded me a Facebook post, a vague, sympathy-seeking paragraph from his mother. "Watching my son suffer because someone weaponized grief is unbearable. Please pray for his peace of mind." Weaponized grief. That was the phrase they chose to describe my father's funeral. By the end of the week, the gossip had grown fangs. Apparently, I was unstable, vengeful, and obsessed. One of Mark's friends even suggested I'd hired the PI because I was paranoid from trauma. Daniel told me not to respond. The moment you engage, they'll twist your words. Stay silent. Document everything. So I did. Every rumor, every post, every text, all saved in a single folder labeled The War. But silence came at a cost. The more I didn't defend myself, the louder their story became. Even my mother's phone started ringing, Mark's father shouting that I was ruining their son's life. His sister left a voicemail full of thinly veiled threats. "You'll regret this, Elise. You'll lose everything trying to hurt him." That night, I broke one of my rules. I went to his social media page. His profile picture had changed. He and Natalie smiling at a dinner party. Caption "New beginnings, even in hard times." The comments were full of hearts, prayers, stay strong emojis. I stared at it for a full minute before closing my laptop, my pulse pounding in my ears. The next morning, I went to therapy. My first real session since everything started. The therapist, a quiet woman named Mira, listened while I explained everything. The funeral, the betrayal, the smear campaign. When I finished, she said something I didn't expect, "Elise, you're doing remarkably well. You haven't collapsed, you've recalibrated." "Recalibrated?" I asked. "Yes. You're not reacting from pain anymore. You're strategizing from clarity. That's strength disguised as stillness." I thought about that all day. Strength disguised as stillness. Because that was exactly what my father used to do. When someone wronged him, he didn't shout. He fixed a chair, sanded a board, rebuilt. What was broken silently, deliberately. He didn't need noise to win. He just needed focus. That night, I found myself back in his workshop, the hum of the old refrigerator, the only sound. His flannel jacket still hung on the hook sleeves, ghosting in the draft. I sat on his stool, opened my notebook, and began listing everything Mark's side had done since the funeral. Public defamation, false harassment claim, emotional distress filing, witness intimidation. Daniel was right. They were throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. And it was time to give them a wall that wouldn't move. The next morning, we met in Daniel's office. The place smelled of coffee and cold ambition. He leaned back in his chair, flipping through a folder. "They filed a motion yesterday," he said, "claiming you've caused Mark severe anxiety. They're requesting the court to make you pay his legal fees." I laughed softly. He cheats, humiliates me at a funeral, and now I owe him therapy. Daniel smiled thinly. "It's a performance. They're building a narrative, you, the grieving, unstable wife. Him, the composed professional trying to move on." He slid a stack of printed screenshots across the desk. "But this is our narrative." I scanned the pages, photos of Mark and Natalie together, time-stamped, just days after the funeral. Public appearances, romantic dinners, hotel check-ins, even a social media post of them at a weekend retreat. "So much for severe anxiety," I murmured. Daniel nodded. "Exactly. We'll file a counter-motion showing his conduct contradicts his claims of distress." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "He really doesn't think consequences apply to him, does he?" "Men like that rarely do," Daniel said quietly, "until a judge reminds them otherwise." That night, I recorded a message for myself on my phone, something I hadn't done before. My therapist suggested it, a letter to your future self. I pressed record. "My name is Elise Harrington. It's been 3 weeks since I buried my father and lost my marriage in the same hour. But I'm not broken. I'm awake. Every time I think I can't take another hit, I remember Dad's voice. Never confuse endurance with weakness. I'm still here, and I'm not done." I saved it, labeled it Proof of Life. 2 days later, Mark's brother showed up outside my office building. Security called me downstairs. He was in the lobby, yelling that I was destroying his family. When I refused to come down, he threw a folded piece of paper at the security desk. A handwritten note. Drop this now before you embarrass yourself further. I took a photo of it and sent it straight to Daniel. He replied 1 minute later. Perfect. Witness intimidation. Forwarded to court file. By the time the preliminary hearing date was set, the whispers had slowed. People were starting to realize there were two sides to every story, and one of them had documentation. I sat at my kitchen table the night before the hearing, surrounded by folders, photos, evidence, the anatomy of betrayal, neatly categorized. On the first page of my statement, I wrote a single line at the top. People mistake silence for surrender. They're about to learn the difference. I closed the file, turned off the lights, and whispered to the darkness, "See you in court, Mark." The courthouse smelled like old paper and rain. It was the kind of morning where even the sky looked hesitant, gray, heavy, unsure. I arrived early. Daniel was already there, standing by the window, calm as always. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Ready enough." The hearing wasn't a full trial, just a preliminary one to determine two things: whether the prenup was valid, whether there was sufficient evidence of infidelity. But that didn't stop Mark from treating it like theater. He walked in 10 minutes late, holding a black umbrella and looking perfectly composed. Navy suit, pale tie. That polite mask he always wore when he wanted people to believe he was the victim. Beside him, his attorney, a man named Graham Wells. All polished smiles and practiced sympathy. And behind them sat his mother, her pearl earrings glinting her face, arranged in what I could only describe as sanctified outrage. When she saw me, she whispered something to Graham, who nodded with the solemn expression of a man who'd rehearsed the part of defending the good son. I didn't look away. The judge, Honor Margaret Ingram, entered at precisely 9. "Let's get to it," she said. Mr. Wells' opening remarks. He stood smoothing his suit. "Your Honor, my client has suffered deeply in recent months. He's endured the death of his father-in-law, a painful separation, and relentless personal attacks stemming from his wife's grief-fueled vindictiveness. We're here because the respondent seeks to exploit an outdated prenuptial clause, one signed under duress in circumstances that no longer reflect the current reality of their marriage." He let that sink in. Then added, "We intend to prove that this clause was never meant to be punitive and that enforcing it now would only serve cruelty, not justice." My attorney didn't move right away. He waited for the silence to settle, then rose. "Your Honor." Daniel said evenly, "We have documented proof that the clause in question was not only voluntary, but proposed by Mr. Harrington himself. We also have verified evidence, time-stamped photographic and digital, of an 8-month extramarital affair during which my client was repeatedly deceived. Enforcement of the clause is not cruelty, it's consequence." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Mark's lawyer began by calling their first witness, Mark's mother, Linda. She took the stand with an air of practiced dignity, one hand on her pearl necklace. Mrs. Harrington Wells began, "How would you describe your daughter-in-law's behavior during her marriage to your son?" She sighed dramatically. Controlling, manipulative. She isolated him from his family. Everything had to be her way. My son just wanted peace. "And the prenup?" "She forced it," she said. "She told him she wouldn't marry him unless he signed. He was devastated, but he loved her." I could feel my pulse in my throat. Every word she spoke was a lie, and yet she delivered it with the calm conviction of someone who's convinced themselves of their own fiction. When Daniel stood for cross-examination, his tone was measured polite, almost too polite. "Mrs. Harrington," he began, "are you aware that your son had an affair with a coworker named Natalie Reynolds for approximately 8 months prior to filing for divorce?" Her chin lifted. "That's an alleged affair." Alleged. Daniel raised a brow. "Would you say 14 hotel receipts, dozens of text messages, and over 100 photos are mere allegations?" Her voice faltered. "My son told me." "Yes," Daniel said smoothly. "Your son told you, and he also told my client he loved her while sharing hotel rooms with another woman." The courtroom went still. The judge scribbled something on her notepad. Daniel continued, "You testified that Elise forced your son to sign a prenup. Are you aware that the infidelity clause was his idea?" Her mouth opened. "That can't be true." Daniel clicked the remote, projecting an email onto the screen. It was from 6 years ago, Mark's own message to his lawyer at the time. Let's include a clause that penalizes cheating, keeps things fair and honest on both sides. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the judge looked mildly impressed. When the witness was dismissed, Linda shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. I didn't return it. Then it was Mark's turn. He took the stand like he was walking into a performance. Calm voice, hands folded, every inch of him playing the wounded husband. Mark, his lawyer, began, "How would you describe your wife's reaction to your request for divorce?" He sighed, a perfect imitation of weary patience. Explosive. She screamed, accused me of things that weren't true. I was worried for her mental health given her father's death. That's why I thought it best to separate quickly before things got worse. I stared at him, my nails pressing half-moons into my palms. A man could burn your life to ashes and still talk like he was saving you from the fire. Daniel stood. "Mr. Harrington, do you recall serving your wife with divorce papers at her father's funeral?" Mark shifted. "I didn't serve her. I handed them to her privately." Privately, Daniel echoed, "at the back of a church, with her father's casket still in view." Mark's jaw tightened. It wasn't meant to be cruel. "No," Daniel said softly, "just efficient." A ripple of quiet laughter broke out in the courtroom before the judge rapped her gavel. Daniel moved on. "Mr. Harrington, did you engage in a romantic or sexual relationship with Natalie Reynolds during your marriage?" Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. "No, she's just a friend." Daniel pressed a button on his laptop. The next slide appeared on the projector, a photograph of Mark and Natalie taken by the PI. They were at a resort spa, Mark's arm around her waist. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't have to. Mark's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "Overruled. Continue." Daniel's voice was almost gentle now. "You said you wanted a clean separation. Is that why, in your messages to Ms. Reynolds, you said once she's grieving, she'll sign anything?" The color drained from Mark's face. Those messages were taken out of context. They're time-stamped 2 days before your father-in-law's death. What context would make them appropriate?" Mark didn't answer. Daniel turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself." The judge leaned back, studying Mark with eyes that had seen every flavor of deceit. After a long pause, she said, "We'll recess for 30 minutes. I've heard enough to form a preliminary opinion." When we reconvened, she didn't waste time. "The prenuptial agreement is valid. The infidelity clause is enforceable. The evidence of adultery is overwhelming and credible. The $200,000 penalty stands." She shifted her gaze to Mark. "And because false testimony was provided by both you and your witness, I'm sanctioning you for wasting the court's time. Your legal fees are your own responsibility." Mark's mother gasped. Mark just stared, frozen, the mask finally cracking. "The marital home remains Mrs. Harrington's separate property," the judge continued. "Division of other assets will proceed per state law minus the penalty. Case adjourned." The gavel struck once sharp final. Mark's lawyer whispered something frantic, but Mark didn't move. His eyes found mine. "I hope you're happy," he said bitterly. "You've destroyed everything." I stood slowly gathering my files. "No, Mark," I said. "You destroyed it. I just stopped holding it together for you." Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and clean. Daniel handed me a cup of coffee. "You did well," he said. "Better than most." "I didn't win," I said softly. "I just survived." He gave me a small smile. Sometimes that's the same thing. As we walked toward the parking lot, I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "You'd have liked that one, Dad." The day after the hearing, the house felt different. Lighter somehow. For months, it had carried the weight of whispered arguments, half-truths, and unspoken exhaustion. Now there was only quiet, but not the hollow kind. This quiet had space in it. Mark hadn't called since the verdict. Not a single text, not a voicemail. But silence from him wasn't peace. It was a pause. The calm before his next attempt to rewrite the story. Daniel warned me. "He'll try to spin this. You won in court, but people like him hate losing control. Stay guarded." And he was right. A week later, his mother left me a voicemail, trembling voice wrapped in venom. "You may have won your money, Elise, but you lost your soul. My son's heart is broken, and you'll answer for that one day." I didn't reply. I simply forwarded it to Daniel's office and deleted it. But then came the messages from mutual friends, screenshots, forwarded posts, whispers, Mark's struggling. "He's saying you lied in court, that he's ruined financially because you trapped him." Trapped him. The same man who planned to emotionally ambush me beside my father's coffin was now the victim again. I didn't bother defending myself. I didn't need to, because for the first time the truth didn't require my voice to stand. It stood on its own. Still, when I saw him once more by accident, it almost threw me off balance. It was 2 weeks later, outside a cafe I'd gone to with my mother. He was across the street leaning against his car, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He looked thinner, tired. There was no confidence left in his stance, only something small and unfinished. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity either. Just distance, like watching someone fade out of a life you've already buried. Later that night, I sat at my father's workbench again. The old lamp flickered as I sanded the edge of a wooden jewelry box he'd never finished. My hands moved on instinct, slow, deliberate. He used to say wood tells the truth when you listen long enough. When I lifted the lid, I noticed something I hadn't before, a small envelope taped inside. I peeled it off carefully. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, yellowed with age. It said, "When you stand up for yourself, grief becomes strength. Finish what's started." The same words he'd written in his earlier note, but this time they didn't feel like advice. They felt like closure. I placed the note back in the box, sealed it, and whispered, "It's finished now, Dad." The divorce finalized quietly, no fanfare, no courtroom scene. Just a digital notification from Daniel Decree signed and processed. Case closed. Mark lost more than the $200,000. He lost his job 2 weeks later after HR received anonymous screenshots of his affair, likely from Natalie's new boyfriend, if the gossip was true. Apparently, she'd moved on already. Poetic, really. He betrayed a woman who would have done anything for him, only to be betrayed by the one he risked it all for. When Daniel told me, I just nodded. Consequences always show up. They just walk slow. I spent the next month cleaning out my father's house, every drawer, every creaky floorboard. Grief doesn't leave all at once. It drips out of you in small, quiet tasks. Every time I packed a box, I whispered a small goodbye. When I reached the last room, his study, I hesitated. The chair still held the shape of him. His favorite flannel still hung on the back. I sat down, opened the window, and let the warm air rush in. For the first time, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel broken. I just felt free. I sold the house a week later, not because I wanted to run, but because I needed to build something that wasn't filled with ghosts. The buyer was a young couple expecting their first child. When I handed them the keys, the wife smiled and said, "It feels peaceful here." I smiled back. "It will be if you listen." On my last night there, I made tea and sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. I recorded one final message on my phone. Not for court, not for evidence, just for me. My name is Elise Harrington. I'm 38 years old. I buried my father and my marriage on the same day, but I'm still standing. The man who thought my grief made me weak taught me something by accident, that pain doesn't break you, it chisels you. My father used to say, kindness isn't weakness, it's restraint. I finally understand that now. Some endings aren't revenge, they're rebirth. I pressed save, labeled it final entry. Then I walked back inside and turned off the lights. Before leaving, I placed my father's old toolbox on the kitchen counter for the new owners, a note taped on top. Never mistake quiet for weakness. It's where strength learns to breathe. As I locked the door, I looked back one last time at the empty rooms, at the echoes of a life that had both broken and rebuilt me. And I smiled. The wind picked up soft and warm, carrying the faint scent of cedar and sawdust. It almost felt like my father was still there, nodding silently, approving. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. "I'm finally done." I stepped off the porch into the soft light of morning, not as a widow, not as a victim, but as someone new. Someone who had learned to start over, not from